Hello, everyone. Welcome to QTRIC National Smart Vehicle Session number 2. So I see attendees here, but as we are expecting more people to join, we will give it another minute or so.
Okay, great. So Lana, I'm just going to check in on the audio side as we get started.
Hear you.
Great, perfect. Okay, well, thanks very much, everyone, for joining. We appreciate it, and we're excited to be going into the next deep dive round of information associated with our National Smart Vehicle Project. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues, Dr. Elnaz Abatalebi and Adi Ramesh, who are going to continue emceeing and running the Q&A portion of our session today. But just by way of introduction, I'm Jospa Petrinich. I'm the director and CEO of QTRIC, and we've got a great lineup here for you today as a precursor to our national conference, which is happening in 2 weeks' time. So with that, I'm just going to quickly introduce my team members around the table, and you can see us on the video screen if you go to gallery view. We've got Elnaz Abatalebi. Elnaz, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Yosapa. Hi, everyone. My name is Elnaz Abatalebi, and I'm a Smart Vehicle Project Lead at QTRIC.
That's great. And we've got Lana Sanderson. Elnaz is joining us from Toronto. We've got Lana Sanderson joining us from Alberta. Lana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, Lana Sanderson from Alberta, Managing Coordinator for QTRIC.
Great, and she is the guru on the back end of the AV system here. Adi Ramesh, Adi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Jasper. I'm Adi Ramesh, the project manager for our electric bus and coach bus project, and I manage our battery electric, hydrogen fuel cell, and big data projects.
Great, and we have Dr. Mahmoud Nashali as well joining us. So Dr. Mahmoud Nashali, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. This is Mahmoud Nashali. I am researcher at QTRIC.
Great, and we're so excited to have our team off to the races on this project. As Elnaz will allude to through the rest of the presentation today, we're really moving forward with all of the technical planning we've done in the last couple of years into an effort this year to get to a joint procurement, really focusing on demonstration of these technologies, moving away from the one-off pilots and getting more in detail into larger fleet procurements for a real first kilometer, last kilometer solution set. So with that, Elnaz, I'm going to turn it over to you to start the agenda, as we have quite a packed agenda and not enough time as per usual.
Sure, thank you. Thanks everyone again for joining this webinar. So the topic of today's webinar is on empirical demonstration evidence and lessons learned from trial data. We're going to hear experiences about pilot projects. So today we're going to have informative sessions. Here you see the speakers we have today. We have Clement Oberg joining us from QLIS. We have Andrew Sador from City of Calgary. We have Lindsay Wigginton from City of Toronto. Shane Amran Quinn is joining us from Utah Transit Authority, and Dr. Mahmoud Nashali from QTRIC. Next slide, please. So before starting with the presentations, just want to give you a quick overview of the vision and mission of a smart vehicle project. So at QTRIC, we are pursuing a joint procurement of integrated and interoperable electrified low-speed autonomous shuttle across Canadian cities to achieve first kilometer, last kilometer applications for transit agencies and airport authorities. So as part of this project, these are a few technical specification and standardization we are pursuing, and we assume to have common and interoperable roadside unit as well as onboard unit. We assume having integration and usage of a dedicated short-range communication system, and to have dedicated or semi-dedicated laneways as part of this procurement, which is SAE level 4. Next slide, please. So basically, the goal is to procure approximately 30 of these shuttles in at least 4 to 8 Canadian cities. The goal is to have a standardization in terms of vehicle-to-vehicle and vehicle-to-infrastructure communication, as well as cybersecurity protocol. In terms of central operating system and charging infrastructure, we are pursuing this standardization. And once the shuttles are in operation, the goal is to have real-time data sharing and performance evaluation of these shuttles. Next slide, please. So before we start with the presentation, I just want to bring to your attention our CUTRIC Low Carbon Smart Mobility Conference, which is happening in mid-June. It's going to be a digital conference, and my colleague Adi will provide you some information about this conference in the next slide. Adi, over to you.
Thanks, Elnaz. Welcome, everyone. It's a great honor to be talking to all of you today. I've seen some of you at the e-bus sessions. It's great to see you here as well. Last year, we had our first annual Low Carbon Smart Mobility Technology Conference. It was an in-person conference in Winnipeg, and we were planning the same for the time period of June 17th to 19th this year as well. But in light of the current circumstance, we have gone fully digital. The team has been working really hard to move it onto a digital platform, and we have a number of exciting panels, and we've seen a lot of response from our speakers, our panelists, and our members as well towards the conference, and we hope to see you all there. Some of the items that we have coming up at this conference are, if we can move on to the next slide, please. We're focusing mainly on four specific project areas as part of this conference. We're looking towards the battery electric bus technology and the development across Canada, US, and Europe, hydrogen fuel cell buses across Canada, US, and Europe, smart vehicles for first kilometer, last kilometer solutions for cities, and big data as a means for better mobility control. If we can move on to the next slide, please. We have a number of panels related to smart vehicles. A number of the speakers we have on today as well. So we hope to see you again at the conference to see these speakers speak on this panel. We have Lindsay Wigginton and Andrew Cedar, who are both speakers today. And we also have Pramil Mary Sandan from the city of Montreal, who will be speaking on the panel on autonomous shuttle pilot experiences, the perspective provided by the cities. If we can move on to the next slide, please. We're also looking at the perspective of the operators and the manufacturers. So we have a couple of panels, one related to manufacturing autonomous shuttles and making their design work for transit needs from the manufacturing perspective. And we have one from the operators on autonomous shuttle pilot experiences, the fleet operator and policy perspectives, as all of these different angles need to really be explored when we're looking at these smart shuttle projects. If we can move on to the next slide, please. We also have Robert Lohman from To Get There, who's going to be providing a keynote on financing To Get There's autonomous vehicle deployments. As we all know, financing and funding some of these projects is a barrier that we need to figure out how to, that we need to develop solutions towards that work for multiple cities and multiple systems across different sizes. If we can move to the next slide, please. We also have a number of government representatives, and we're very excited about this. We have a number of speakers, including the Honorable Minister Sakaria from Ontario. We have Mayor Donna Iveson from the City of Edmonton, and we have MP Ali Ehasi, who's a Member of Parliament for Willowdale. So we're very excited. We hope to see you all there. And with that, I'd like to pass it on back to you, Elnaz.
Yes, thanks. I just want to turn it to Head of Autonomous Vehicle at Keolis. Thanks for participating in this webinar, Clement. And I think we're going to start off with a video that he provided to us, and then I will turn it to him for his presentation. So Lana, if you could start the video. Thank you. So with that, I turn it over to Clement to start his presentation while Alana is loading the slides. Just getting back to the slides again.
We're just going to do a quick sound test, Clement, to make sure we're able to hear you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you for the introduction. My name is Clément Bourg. I'm the head of autonomous vehicle for the Keolis Group. For those who don't know Keolis, we are a public transport operator owned by the French National Railway and the CDPQ, which is a fund pension based in Quebec. We were the happy operator of this exciting project in Candiac, in the suburbs of Montreal, and I will try to summarize a bit the main learnings of this project. Can you move to next slide, please? So as you may have seen, we were using a Navia shuttle in this project. It's one of our numerous projects we had worldwide. I'm based in Paris, as you can hear with my accent, but we are supporting all the subsidiaries of the group worldwide, whether in North America, in Europe, or Australia. We have driven more than 100,000 kilometers, many hours of operation, more than 35 deployments and projects in the world, and more than 200,000 passengers. Can you move to next slide, please? Okay, more information about the specific project in Candiac. We had one shuttle in service. It was free of charge, like most of the project worldwide, from October 2018 to December last year. It was only open during weekdays, and the main objective was to connect a park and ride and a park at the riverside, Parc André Gicotet. It was 2 kilometers long with 7 stops, and we have driven more than 1,000 kilometers in this road, which was in mixed traffic, in open road. Some key facts. Was the first AV deployed in Quebec, thanks to the new law 165. It's important to mention that because previously it was not possible legally to deploy such vehicles in open roads, and this law modified the road safety rules to make it possible, thanks to an approval from the Ministry of Transportation in Quebec. It was the first Navia shuttle in operation made in their US factory. For those who don't know Navia, it's a French startup, and Keolis is one of their shareholders, but it's not the only kind of vehicle we operate. We have also operation with Easy Miles and also local motors and some 12 meters buses like the one in Sweden with Volvo, but that's a different story. What was important for us to make it possible for this project is to have a close relationship with the MTQ, Ministère des Transports du Québec, and the SAAQ, Société de l'Assurance Automobile du Québec, which is in charge of getting the approval and validate the trial. So it was many different meetings with them because, well, it was a first for them, and I'm pretty sure they have learned as much as us. To become even more demanding for the next project, which is a good thing because I guess it's the same for all the projects worldwide. It's a safety first approach. Unfortunately, must remain honest, we had some technical issues with the shuttle linked to many different things, and mostly because of the environment. That's the reason why we had to reduce the days of operation. I will get to that a bit later in my presentation. And because of that, and maybe some other reasons, we only had few passengers that took the chance to test the service in Candiac. Among the key learnings, we had to manage a daily operation in mixed traffic with some dangerous overtaking. What is interesting is to see that depending on the state, on the country, the behavior of the driver is different. The vehicle is supposed to be the same everywhere, but we have to adapt depending on the way people drive. in this specific place, as you can see on the left, on the Boulevard Montcalm, which is pretty wide, but supposed to be only for one vehicle, we made it possible for the other cars to overtake safely the shuttle. But for the shuttle, it's also difficult sometimes to anticipate the moves of the other vehicle, whether they turn right after the vehicle, what we call a queue de poisson in French, but that can cause an emergency braking at some point, and some other behaviors of the drivers, the way to manage cross roads, etc. We also have to manage these crossroads, which are different in North America than they are in Europe or in Australia. Left turns, for those who don't know, it's one of the key complex use case for a vehicle, because when, of course, you drive on the right side of the road, turning left means to cross one or two different roads and vehicle coming from left or right, which is a complexity. We also had to connect to traffic light through V2I, and also to cross railway, which was a first for us. We definitely learned that technical maintenance was key, even if the Navia team was supporting us from Michigan, which is not too far. It's still different than having someone on place. Regarding winter conditions, as you can imagine how it is in Canada, we were pretty successful in the beginning with some light snow, as you can see on the photo on the right, but obviously when it's too cold, the vehicle cannot be operated. It's not part of its ODD. Anticipating, the change in the environment is also key, but I will get to that later. Can you move to next slide, please? And the next one, bad recommendations. I try to put few criteria to help people trying to deploy such vehicles. Obviously, having a site, oh, sorry, this one is still in French, but that favorize high visibility for the vehicle is key, because, well, it's an innovation and you want to show to the other cities what, and that was the case for the city of Candiac, that they were capable of doing some innovation like that even before some other big cities in the country. Having a track not too long is also important. I talked about the complexity of changing lanes. It's of course not easy, as the vehicle has to follow exactly the same invisible rail, we can say. Having some good LiDAR markers, which means having some fixed obstacles so the vehicle can safely know where it is key, which means that if for some reason the environment change, you've got another tree, you put some new buildings, there's some civil works, like it happened in Candiac, that may end by forcing you to do another mapping for the vehicle. So few different criteria that you can see. I don't need to comment all of them, but it's really key to get a successful project. And if I can insist on one, having a storage location right next to the track is also very important, because this vehicle is still only accepted under certain conditions. You also have to detail, when you do your ministerial dossier, how you will drive from the track to the storage location. So if it's 1-2 kilometers away, it's of course a big issue for the operation, of course, and also for the approval, as it has to be done autonomously as well. Next slide, please. Few different use cases that we have tried. It's what we thought were the best one for these vehicles, whether on a rural site like we done in Belgium. University campuses are also pretty good for these trials. Some pedestrian area, airports, and shopping malls. It just depends on what you expect, but being clear from the beginning is key, so we do not disappoint the people. And strangely, I say strangely because I've seen many different trials in the last 4 years, but most of the people really have a very are very enthusiastic about this project, even if the vehicle is still pretty slow and have some stops. You know, it's not really not always a smooth ride. Most people are really enthusiastic, and we've got an acceptance rate of more than 90% most of the time. Next slide, please. Okay, that was the only one, the last one. I only had 10 minutes, if I'm correct. And if you have some question, I'd be happy to answer.
Yes, thank you so much. So I just checking with my colleague Adi if there is any questions.
I don't see any questions at the moment in the chat box or Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and I'll be moderating them throughout the session. I do see one question from Laura and Isaac. Were there any unusual challenges with crossing the railroad specifically? You did mention that that was the first come on. So do you have anything to add about the specific challenges regarding the railroad?
Well, to be more precise, it was not a very used railway. What I mean by that is that it's only for merchandise, for goods, 1 or twice a day, but still, you know, safety first. You have to anticipate that a train can come. So we had to do 2 different things. First, we tried to connect to the system in charge of I mean, the red lights that warn the vehicles, but the technology was not ready to do that. And I mean, we could detail that later maybe, but there's some standards which are different in Europe and in the US and in Canada regarding the DSRC protocol and the way to communicate with infrastructure. So we had troubles managing that. We decided to put what we call a go operator, which means that having a safety driver on board is something that I forgot to mention, but having someone on board trained by our team to know how to manage these vehicles. We stop the vehicle before crossing the railway, checking that everything is fine before to move to and to cross it.
Okay, that's great, Clement. Thank you so much. I do have a question from Qtrick on our end. So in terms of like these developments, you did deploy in the city of Candiac, and you have a number of deployments all across the world as well that you highlighted in your presentation. Mm-hmm. So from the lessons learned in your deployment in the city of Candiac itself, like if you had to distill, what is stopping more Canadian cities from following Candiac's example, and from starting out with more deployments? Like what would you mention in terms of like what the hurdles are?
Well, definitely winter conditions, because even if last year we were able to operate until late December, I mean, that's not the case, and we haven't been able to do that the year before. When it's too cold, the LiDARs are not working properly. Of course, the snow is a new obstacle for the vehicle, and it cannot recognize the trunk of a tree or a bench or whatever is used as a LiDAR marker. So that's definitely the key, because well, depending on the season, you can only operate from, I don't know, I would say May to November. That's one of the first drawback. Then, of course, it's still pretty expensive. We all make these trials to learn and to be able someday to remove the driver from the vehicle. We're working quite hard on that, and that's definitely something that will appear more and more in the next years. And for sure, in terms of business case, that will help. Because in most countries, the driver represents 60 to 70% of the cost of operation.
That's great. So if I could repeat what you said, just to make sure that I captured specifically what you mentioned, like the main hurdles that you would see as it pertains to the Canadian context would be, one, the winter conditions, which has multiple challenges associated with it, including difficulty in operation and LiDAR markers that might change and so on. The second one being the cost associated, as everyone is trying to learn with these deployment projects. And the third being the further development of the business case. As we see, one of the main drivers for the business case is the removal of the driver from the operation of the vehicle, which who could be one of the largest cost costs in terms of operation of the vehicle itself. Did I capture that correctly?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Perfect. I believe we have a couple of more questions. I'm going to check in with my colleague Elnaz just to make sure we still have a couple more minutes for Clement for questions.
I think
Okay.
we have time for 2 more questions.
Okay. So you did mention this as part of your previous answer, Clement, in terms of like winter conditions did cause some changes to the LiDAR markers. But in terms of like the HD mapping and the remapping for the vehicle, we have a question from Kyle Catney regarding how frequently you needed to complete remapping for the vehicles based on landscape changes, and where the remapping done proactively, or was it caused by one of errors during one of the operations of the vehicle itself?
So my advice would be from the beginning of any project to put in the budget at least 2 mappings a year. It of course depends on the area where you want to operate, but that's what we have done for Candiac. We also had to do it because Navia changed a bit their technology. They were previously using a 2D mapping, using the vehicle as a recorder of the environment, and then they moved to a different system called, it's a 3D mapping system, whatever the name is, that is more accurate and better for the situation we had in Candiac. So we did it twice a year, and to do that, we had to come back to the site with a specific tool called the MMS that you basically put on the roof of any car to record the environment. They are not capable currently, and that's the same for EasyMile, to do it remotely. You can, erase some part of the map under certain conditions, but when it's too big, you have to remap. And it's most of the time easier to do it entirely to improve the service. I mean, there's many tools that help you understand when it's necessary to do it, using some LiDAR heat map. And I mean, that's the way we do in most of our projects.
That's great. Thank you, Clement. Just to make sure I've captured everything, I'm just going to repeat your answer. You mentioned that you recommend two mappings a year, and the reasons for you in general, but then you did conduct 2 mappings per year. Some of the reasons being the tech did change in the middle during your trial. It started with 2D mapping that was recommended by Navia, but the tech did change in the middle of the trial to a 3D mapping methodology. And the 3D mapping requires a specific tool. It cannot be performed remotely. It requires a specific tool that needs to be added on top of the vehicle and needs to be moved around the route in order to capture the map. Did I capture correctly? Okay, perfect. With that, I do believe we are out of time. Thank you so much, Clement, for your presentation. Jasipa, did you have something to add there?
I'm going to jump in. In fact, we have a few more minutes for Clement. We have quite a few questions, Adi. So I'm going to recommend we have time for actually 2 more questions. Clement, you were very fast in answering, so that is good.
Oh,
Adi, over to you if you want to. No, it's very good. Adi, do you want to take a couple more questions from Primel, Ala, and Randy?
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Jasipa. We do have a question from Primel from the city of Montreal. He asks if you know of any Navia plans of refining the shuttles so that they can better adapt to these winter environments. You did highlight that the winter environment is one of the hurdles to adoption in Canada. So is there any plans from Navia to better adapt the vehicles, like better distinguishing threats and non-threatening objects on the route?
So thank you, Primel. I mean, I cannot commit for Navia, obviously, but I know they are working on it. We've got many different projects that suffer from winter conditions, whether in Northern Europe or in Canada, obviously. But the main issue is the sensors, not the technology behind. Most of the LiDARs, the VLP from Velodyne, and many others, and actually the one they use currently are not capable of being in use in very cold conditions. I've seen some question about the battery, but maybe I will detail that later. They're working with some universities to try to adapt what works pretty well already in Canada with the buses, for instance. But it's a long process, and these companies being startup companies, it's not easy for them to integrate everything because they have to work in very hot conditions. When they go to, I don't know, Saudi Arabia, for instance, in very cold conditions, they try to make the best choice to suit most of the needs, but unfortunately, they are not ready yet for that. Plus, the snow is a big issue. The LiDARs cannot identify what is behind the snow, obviously, but it's important to mention it. It's like being in a completely different environment. Depending on the level of snow you have on the street, the street may look very, very different for the vehicle that doesn't know where it goes, and that's obviously a big issue.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, like they are working on it. It is a work in progress. We will get there, but we are working on it as these vehicles have to operate in a wide range of temperatures and environments, from the heat of Saudi Arabia to the winter of Montreal. The main challenge at the moment with winter conditions is with the sensors. With the sensors not able to operate potentially in the winter conditions, and specifically with the LiDAR sensors, as they are not able to see through the snow.
Indeed.
Okay, perfect. We have one more question. I believe we have time for one more question. Just to switch gears, we have a question related to ridership and people riding the vehicle. We have a question from Alana Itani, who asked if there was any survey asking users whether they would use such a service regularly, even with the not very smooth ride.
If I'm correct, we haven't done it in Candiac, but we've done it in some other places. In France, for instance, the answer is once again pretty strange for those who work a lot on this project, but is yes. But I don't know if it's only because it's a free of charge service is free of charge, which makes it different. Because I always compare that to the Google car. I mean, what Waymo does. We all heard about it. We all have seen videos, but most of the people haven't been able to test it. Thanks to these shuttles, we open the market and we let the people come for free on board. So it's really exciting for them to see a vehicle with no steering wheel, no pedal, etc., that works autonomously. And that's the reason why most of the people are enthusiastic. In places where we stop the service, many people are asking for the service to resume.
So, if I captured that correctly, there is demand. A number of people were happy with the service, and where service was interrupted, people are asking for the service to resume. And the survey wasn't conducted in Candiac, but the survey was issued in your other deployments around the world. And people have indicated that they would write this, but the challenge for you is you're still not sure how much the price versus the fact that it is free plays a factor into that.
Yes, indeed.
Okay, perfect. With that, thank you so much for your time, Clement. I'm going to pass it back to my colleague, Elnaz.
Yes, thanks, Clement, for the interesting presentation. We have a couple of other questions, but we pose it later as we just want to be right on time. So our next presenter is Andrew Sadur. Andrew is Business Development Coordinator at Transportation Strategy Department at City of Calgary. Thanks, Andrew, for participating in this webinar. I turn it over to you, Andrew.
Hey, thank you so much. Would it be possible for me to share my screen and run through my own slides, or?
I'll jump in there. The short answer is no. It is possible, Andrew, but unfortunately, just with the amount of cyber insecurity around Zoom lines right now, it's best for us to securitize on our end. So if you can advise Lana, there is a little bit of a delay, but it keeps us from being Zoom bombed.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so my name is Andrew Sadur. I work with the City of Calgary Transportation Department. Part of my job is working on new technology initiatives. So I got to run the low-speed autonomous vehicle pilot in Calgary about 2 years ago, and right now my current project is running the e-scooter program. It was really cool running the program because I believe we were the first in Canada to have a public operation. I believe we beat Montreal by a few days. I know we were the first in Western Canada. So it was a really cool experience for me. Got to be on the national. But I really wanted to start off by talking about the story about how all this came to be. So if you go to the next slide. And then the next one. So about 3 years ago, our city council came to us and said, hey, there's all these new cool transportation technologies. So things like autonomous vehicles, e-bikes, aerial drones, electric cars, and they were wondering how it was going to affect the transportation network in the city as a whole. So if you go to the next slide. And so a colleague and I wrote this report called the Future of Transportation in Calgary, which we worked with industry, academia, and cities from across the world in order to understand these technologies and how they would have an impact on Calgary. So if you go to the next image, and so one of the things that we did is we actually took our senior level staff and counselors out in a semi-autonomous Tesla. We just cold called Tesla and said like, hey, can we take some of these folk out? We want to show them the technology. So they provided that service to us free of charge. And it was a really interesting experience to see how they responded and reacted to the technology, actually being able to touch and experience it rather than just reading about it in a report. So if you go to the next slide. And so working with industry, we looked at what are the top technological trends. And the one that really rose to the top is autonomous vehicle technology, that level 3 to 5, where the vehicle is doing most of the work. And so we thought, well, how can we kind of explore this with the citizens in Calgary and really look at the potential effects of it? So we go to the next slide. And so seeing this hands-on demonstration, how council reacted and how our senior administration reacted, not just reading a report, but actually getting out and experiencing the technology. We wanted to do something similar with citizens. So if you go to the next 2 images, we looked around the world to see what was going on in other jurisdictions. And so we saw both in Singapore and Las Vegas that they were doing these things called low-speed autonomous shuttles, and that they were quite popular. So we actually got to talk both with Singapore and Las Vegas about their experience, and they had a really, really positive experience with them. We saw that there had been demos of the technology at conferences in Canada, but nothing really available to the public. So we thought, well, this is an initiative that we could do as part of this Future of Transportation report. So if you go to the next slide. So we brought this to council, the report passed, and one of the recommendations in the report was to endorse the City of Calgary's participation in field trials of a low-speed autonomous vehicle pilot project. And so we got council approval on it, which was great. And so then if you go to the next slide, so that was all of the approvals. Now we actually have to go and run the pilot. And so that was a whole other exercise of figuring out how to do that. So if you go to the next slide, and maybe just put all the goals up on the screen. So the first goal of the pilot was to deploy an automated vehicle to understand how it operates in Calgary. And so as the last presenter said, understanding how it operates in our environmental conditions. We only operated for 1 month in September. And so although we should have been sunny and warm the whole time, we actually did get to experience some light snow and some adverse conditions. So it really helped understand if something like that was feasible to operate year round. Increase the public awareness of the technology. That was the reason for having the public involved, and gather public feedback that could be used for future planning efforts. So we'll talk a bit about it later in the presentation, but working with the local university in order to do some of those surveys to collect perception data. And then helping inform and develop highly qualified public sector officials, industry and academia in the area of connected and autonomous vehicles. And I think this was probably one of the biggest benefits of basically having staff trained on how you run an autonomous vehicle pilot and how you deal with autonomous vehicles. So that working with Transport Canada and Alberta Transportation and figuring out how do you deal with autonomous vehicles? How do you deal with autonomous vehicle insurance? And some of those other questions. So if you go to the next slide. So this was our route. So it was about a 1K loop. So it ran from our LRT station, which we have an LRT station at our Calgary Zoo. And for some planning reason, our science center is by the zoo, but it's about a 700 meter walk away from the transit station. And so this was kind of our perfect last mile problem. And so if you just put all the bullets up on the screen. And so we were lucky that we had this ideal site in some ways, that it served as this great last mile solution that didn't take away from walking and cycling. It connected a LRT station with a major destination, and kind of on top of that, because it was the science center, the shuttle did have that science centery exhibit kind of feel to it. So you had a lot of people from all age demographics coming in and riding the shuttle. A lot of kids actually. And the other big thing with this is that the city actually owned the land, and so we're unlike Ontario, and we don't actually have a policy in place to run autonomous vehicle pilots. And so what we had to do with this is we had to declare, one, this is private city land, and that we were going to do a road closure, and we closed the road off with flaggers. And so there were some zoo maintenance vehicles that operated there, and so the flaggers would basically close the road for that period of time, and then the vehicle would operate then. So we couldn't have done it if we didn't have that private piece of road. It was, so promoting our partners, it was great to have the Calgary Zoo and Spark on board, and it again served as kind of an attraction for both sites. We actually put the panda on the side of the vehicle to help promote the Calgary Zoo site, and we operated for around 1 month during September. So if we go to the next slide. And so how many people does it take to run an autonomous vehicle pilot? It takes a ton. So we worked really closely with Transport Canada. They provided us money through the ACATS fund, so we got $50,000 from them. Alberta Transportation didn't provide funding, but did help out with the setup and just cooperation with us. The University of Calgary ran 3 separate projects studying different components of the low-speed autonomous pilot. We had private donors such as ATCO, TELUS, ATS Traffic, and probably the biggest contributor by far was Pacific Western, and they were a really great company to work with. So they're a vehicle operator. They run a lot of the buses in Calgary, and so they stepped up to the plate and were actually operating the service. So they were really great to work with, and we couldn't have done it without them. And then we had groups like Hexagon, which is an Alberta-based company. They're positioning intelligence division, and they actually provided the hardware in order to provide the precise GPS location of the shuttle, and so operated within 5 millimeters of accuracy, which was incredible. So we go to the next slide. And you can just maybe put all of these up. So for the site setup, we had to create and put down basically these giant signs that served as the LiDAR markers. And so then after they were put down in strategic locations, then the vehicle had to map them out. And that's how the vehicle saw. We had to put more of them on the northern part of the route just because there was less identifiable objects there. For a place to store the vehicle, we were initially going to store it in this zoo maintenance area. But then the facility just didn't work with the height. And so we basically had to put out, get another structure. And so our guys from Transit actually just went and bought this tent from Canadian Tire and set it up. It met the procurement guidelines of under $5,000. And this worked during the summer season, but it probably wouldn't work during winter. It was just to cover from rain and hail. And then we did other things like putting down asphalt in order for the vehicle to stop and start at. It was operating on a gravel surface, which was something that Easy Mile, the shuttle operator, had never done before. And then we had to put in things like porta potties for the flaggers. So there's all these little costs that came up that you wouldn't expect with running a pilot project. Josipa, how much time do I have left?
So you have can you hear me?
Go ahead, Elna.
Yeah, so about 10 minutes.
Okay, perfect. That would be great. Mm-hmm. Okay, sounds good. If you could just pop over to the next slide. So media, because it was the first of its kind, we got a ton of media coverage. I got to do the talk show circuit. We were even featured in the States on NBC because it was the first one in Canada. For our opening event, we had Kent Hare, which was a MP in the area, show up and showcase that it could be used with wheelchairs. So it was a really neat moment. If you go to the next. So then it was open to the public, which was great. And there was this really great story of on the opening day where we were setting up, these 5 women were waiting, and they were about an hour early. And I said, "Oh, by the way, like this doesn't open for a while." And they said, "Yeah, we know. We're really excited." And they were a group of women with disabilities that didn't allow them to operate vehicles, and so they were really excited for autonomous vehicle technology. And I just had a really good conversation about what this type of technology would mean for them. And it was really interesting because I thought the first people to ride it would be a bunch of tech nerds. So it was really cool kind of seeing the social aspect of how a technology like this can improve people's lives. And so we operated from 10 to 4 p.m. each day, which kind of met with the Science Center hours. We had people from all walks of life show up. We had a lot of school kids, people from Novotel working on the technology, coming and seeing their technology in action. And then we had the University of Calgary students on both sides taking surveys. So seeing how people felt about the technology. So in that month, we had around 5,000 rides, which is pretty great. Next slide. And so now for some of the concerns. So one of the things, if you go back, one of the issues that arose is that because it took place on a gravel road, that there was a lot of dust, and that dust would actually trigger the sensors. And so our roads crews actually had to go out and put down calcium chloride so that the dust wouldn't come up. So that helped, but it would still seem to be an issue. And then because it was a gravel road, when it would rain, some of the track would fill with water. And then as soon as the vehicle hit the water puddle, it would splash the sensor and the vehicle would stop. And so probably best not to operate it on a gravel road. You ideally want a paved surface. And then there was just some issues with sign placement. So you need to have the signs placed in an area where the vehicle can recognize them. So we initially had it placed behind a shrub. That wasn't great, so we had to move it. And then there was other things too, just like we had an instance where a magpie flew in front of the vehicle and the vehicle stopped. So they're very, very sensitive. We had no incidents or injuries that occurred with the shuttle. It was still 100% safe, but it was just very, very cautious. So if you go to the next slide.
Sorry, Andrew, to interrupt. So as you want to leave, just like 5 minutes for Q&A, if you could wrap up like in 4 minutes, that would be great. So
okay, we'll do it.
Time for questions. Thank you.
Yeah. So with the University of Calgary study, one of the big things that I found from it is we asked a question about what environment people are comfortable operating in, and the biggest thing was they want to operate in a dedicated lane or separated from the rest of traffic, that they weren't comfortable in operating in a mixed right away. If you go to the next slide. And so after Calgary, Edmonton was like, hey, we want to take part in this too. And so the vehicle went up there and they conducted a very similar study and found the exact same results, that people were comfortable with operating in a dedicated right of way. They didn't want to operate in mixed traffic. Next. So there were a lot of positive externalities that occurred with the project. So I'll just fly through these. One was just the Hexagon Novotel, they're a local company. They actually built the hardware for the vehicle to do its positioning. Again, 5 millimeters of accuracy. So this was a big boost for them and kind of showcase their technology to the world. So it was great being able to have that as part of the vehicle. Next. And now they actually moved to testing autonomous vehicles in one of our snow dump sites. So a real autonomous vehicle. Next. And there was a bunch of university studies done with the technology. So one of them was placing a piece of fiber optic cable underneath the route and actually detecting where the vehicle was via basically seismology. And so kind of the key thing from this is go to your universities if you're going to do a pilot and see what different types of research that they want to do, because sometimes it's not always intuitive. Next. And then we had a display donated to us by another company where people could voice their thoughts on autonomous vehicle technology and actually showcase how it worked. So again, kind of fitting in with that science center feel and having it be a science center exhibit. Next. And I think one of the biggest externalities is after we did our pilot, there was a bunch of other jurisdictions that put up their hand and said, hey, we want to participate in this. And so Pacific Western basically took the shuttle on a road show, and it went from Calgary to Edmonton to Wetaskiwin to Surrey to Vancouver and to Beaumont for probably its biggest deployment. It was there for quite a few months. Next. And so one of the biggest benefits that I saw is just the level of government collaboration. So if you go to the next two images, it really helped us work with the province and Transport Canada on how to import a shuttle, how to deal with things like insurance. And because of this, we've been contacted by a bunch of other jurisdictions who've said, how do you run something like this? And we've been able to provide our level of expertise. Next. So conclusions for deployment. So the technology is here, kind of. So it's not perfect. It's not like you can just put an autonomous shuttle out there and it'll run. There's still some issues with things like if a bird flies in front of the radar or if you encounter dust. The vehicle should operate in separate right away from other vehicles. For public transit applications, vehicles will still require an operator for the foreseeable future. I think you guys probably know this at Qtrick better than anyone else. Drivers serve multiple functions. They're not just there to drive the vehicle. They're there to provide that customer service aspect. They're there to take fares. And with a vehicle like this, also to deal with technical errors. If anything went wrong in the vehicle, they're the person to help deal with it. So this is probably one of the biggest barriers that I see for driverless shuttle technology is that they do still require an operator. And so the cost of operating one of these vehicles actually doesn't go down. It actually might go up. So if you go to the next slide, I think I just have two left. So the public adapts the vehicle fairly quickly. So people were scared of going in it, but then as soon as they got in it, it was seen as normal. People are most comfortable with the vehicle in a separate right of way. And I just don't think that these vehicles will replace conventional transit, and likely they'll serve a specific purpose. So I think I have one last slide, just ending on a kind of an anecdote. Oh, no, two slides. So you need partners if you're going to do a pilot. Maybe just go back one. Sorry to rush this. You need partners if you're going to do a pilot. And so for us, you need that external operator, which was Pacific Western. If you want to keep the cost low, look for additional sponsors. The universities have a bunch of topics that they're interested in. Go talk with them. And the pilots help develop and showcase local talent. So I would say the pilot was well worth it. And so just to end it on a historical anecdote, at the 1900s World's Fair, they deployed the moving sidewalk, and the moving sidewalk was supposed to be the future of cities. Every city, that's how people are going to get around. And it's if you go to the next two images, it's not that moving sidewalks ever disappeared. It's just that they moved to a very specific niche, and so their niche was basically airports. Now you have moving sidewalks and airports, and I think it'll be something similar with autonomous shuttles, where it's not like every street corner is going to be have an autonomous shuttle on it. It will more be so that they'll serve a very specific purpose, whether it be an office campus, whether it be at an amusement park, whether it be completing the first and last mile. But it's really, really important that you have a purpose for the shuttle, and that it's actually solving a problem, not just, hey, you have a solution in looking for a problem. So I think that's it for me. I know I probably went a little bit over and rushed the last bit of it, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It was a very interesting presentation. I just started to add it for a question. I think we only have 4 minutes for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and we do apologize for rushing you through this. Great presentation. No worries. We're going to keep the answers a little bit quick as well, just in the same tune as your presentation a little bit. Okay. So the first question I have is regarding, you've mentioned through your presentation the trajectory of how you developed the pilot in terms of you saw that you looked at the technology trend, you saw public adoption, you saw how these technologies existed in other pilots around the world. But in terms of the primary business case for these shuttles, like if we move beyond the pilot stage, what would you believe is the primary business case? You saw those specific like use cases, but what would be the business case?
So we only ran it for a month because we wanted to understand if we could use shuttles in the future. We wanted to understand how to deal with an autonomous vehicle. The ridership and exposure to the public was definitely there, and we had an ideal site. So for the business case, if we were to move forward and do something permanently, we would basically have to break it down and see the costs and if it would make sense. So we'd have to do a ridership analysis to say, is something like this worth it? What would we have to charge, or could we provide it for free and it just be a science center exhibit?
And Andrew,
I think
maybe if I can ask you, like, when you're thinking about that, is the idea basically philosophically the business case for the city would be increase ridership in transit, or is it decrease parking spots for cars? Like, what is the end goal of having these swank vehicles? Is it to drive transit ridership, to decrease cars, or to add a service that was never there, that isn't pulling from transit or supporting it, but just adding new service?
I think for the zoo science center site, it would be with all things, it's very site specific. So for them, I think one, it serves as a attractor to get people to the science center, which the city of Calgary helps to fund and is one of our partners. There is some issues with parking at the site, so that's why you have a giant parking lot there. So if you ever wanted to redevelop a site like that, having a low-speed autonomous shuttle could help to say, hey, we can provide less parking because we have this service. So it's really for a multitude of reasons, but with everything, it's going to be site-specific.
That's great, Andrew. So it's going to be site specific. Some of the reasons could be increase in traffic, be it ridership in transit or the sites themselves, and reducing parking and congestion and all those great things. But it could be site specific as to which of those benefits you're going to see.
Yep.
So we do have another question. As we mentioned, that the goal behind the pilot was to learn from the adoption of these technologies. We have a question regarding your learnings from the pilot itself, from the data and knowledge gathered. What additional features would be required of these vehicles themselves to make them usable on public roads? Like you did mention some of your learnings regarding going to your university, asking them to be involved in your pilots and so on. But what would be required for them to be used on public roads?
I would say number one thing is reliability. If you want the public to ride it, it can't be, oh, it works 90% of the time. It has to work 99.9995% of the time and under different circumstances. And technologically, like, it worked a lot of the time, but it didn't work 99% of the time, which I think it would need to in order for the public to trust it and just for it to function in our transit system. So the technology, I think, still needs to be improved.
That's great. That echoes some of the answers we found in our eBus project as well, where transit is extremely mission critical. It needs to be operational. We can't have any issues that would affect service. So thank you so much, Andrew. I don't want to take us over time, Elda, so I'm going to pass it back to you. And thank you so much for your great presentation, Andrew.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next presenter is Lindsay Wigginton. Lindsay is project manager at the Strategic Policy and Innovation at City of Toronto. So I turn it to you, Lindsay.
Great, thanks. And can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
So first of all, thanks to Elnaz and the team for having me. I'm always really excited for a chance to speak with some of my counterparts working on similar projects. And I've often picked up the phone and called Andrew and called Permail. So grateful to them for all the support they've provided so far to the City of Toronto. And yeah, just enjoying the space to kind of share some learning. My name's Lindsay. As Elnaz mentioned, I'm part of the Strategic Policy and Innovation Unit in the Transportation Division at the City of Toronto. We're actually a new unit that kind of came out of a recent reorg within our division. And so we deal with automated vehicles, but we also deal with sort of all the sort of emerging and strategic transportation files, so micromobility and other things to that effect. So it's really exciting to be able to kind of make the connections between some of what's emerging in the transportation space. I don't know if he's in the participant list today, but I work closely on this project with my colleague Fahad Khan, and just wanted to mention his work on this project as well. Oh, and I'm trying to change slides, but that's not me. So what I'm going to talk about today, a little bit just of background, I think, on Toronto's project. I know some of you are familiar with it already, some might not be. We are in the middle of our procurement process, actually. So unlike some of the other trials, we did go through sort of a formal city procurement. This was also done in partnership with our two major transit agencies in the region, so TTC and Metrolinx. And so just by nature of being in the middle of procurement, there are some things that I can't talk about in too much detail at the moment. So this is really sort of like a checkpoint. What have we learned so far? But our learning is far from done. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the performance objectives that we did build into that RFP, and then what we've learned from the process so far. Next slide. So just for a bit of further framework as well in terms of what's happening at the City of Toronto, as some of the other speakers mentioned, Ontario is a bit of an anomaly in Canada where we do have at the provincial level an automated vehicles pilot program. So anyone can apply to the province to put an automated vehicle on any public road in Ontario. So we don't have the same barrier where we have to do this on city property or that kind of thing. As a result of that, but also just sort of keeping an eye on the trends, our team was given a mandate by council almost 4 years ago now, I believe, to kind of come up with the City of Toronto's position on automated vehicles and make sure that we're prepared. And so work has been happening at the City of Toronto throughout that time, and we were able to take what's called our Automated Vehicles Tactical Plan to City Council in October of last year, and it was approved, and it's one of really the only documents of its kind in North America. It's really a comprehensive plan. We worked with all 30 divisions of the city to think about how transportation automation will affect everything from our winter maintenance to public health to environment objectives. And so there's several dozen tactics in there, but there are 5 big things that we're doing in the next 3 years. And the automated shuttle trial is one of those. Next slide. And this is just pulled from our plan, and I think it's important to share because it kind of informs why we decided that piloting an automated shuttle would be something that the city and its transit partners want to do. We have this vision for integrated mobility, and so as we think about what it means to uptake transportation automation in the City of Toronto, we want to really keep that laser focus on transit-centric, and we want to be using these technologies to funnel more people into our mass transit system and not cannibalize that ridership. Next slide. This slide's really important because it was really helpful for us in coming up with the use case. And I know a lot of the work Kutrick is doing is to work with multiple cities to come up with what a use case for an automated shuttle could be there. And I guess, Toronto and some of our other big cities stand out in the fact that a first mile, last mile problem is a problem in some parts of the City of Toronto, but it's not our only transportation problem. And we, TTC actually has a mandate by City Council to cover 90% of the city within 400 meters of transit. So it actually only leaves 10% of the city that has no transit coverage. And so the way that we're thinking about microtransit sort of exists in that context. So TTC has actually come up with an internal framework that they're starting to use to think about microtransit. And I'm sharing it here. Basically, again, kind of that same vision where it's not to replace conventional transit, but is there an opportunity for automated shuttles to provide service in niches that are not currently being provided? And again, outside of that 400-meter service area. So there were 4 use cases that they identified: geographic gaps in service, time gaps in service, industrial areas with different kind of shift work schedules, and then overnight service. And so we chose the first one for this pilot, which is more of a first mile, last mile application. But as we think about what a step 2 and a step 3 could be, it could be also testing shuttles for these other use cases. Next slide. So this is a little bit wordy, but these are the objectives that we outlined. So the funding for our automated shuttle trial is coming predominantly from Transport Canada through the ACATS funding program. We applied in 2017 and got the go in 2018. So we've been working on it ever since then. What's important to highlight here is that we're really not, the primary goal for us is not about testing the technology, but rather testing its integration into our systems. Both our physical sort of transit system, can it connect to the GO train on time? What does it look like for us to manage a project like this? And also kind of culturally for both the city, TTC, and Metrolinx, what does it mean to come up with our requirements for something that's like something we've never seen before? And so really the way that we're measuring the success of this pilot is whether we achieve learnings on these on these 5 first items. And then we also have some objectives around increasing public just awareness and potentially support for the use of innovation in the transit system. There's some economic development goals attached to that as well. So how could we attract more of these companies to start up shop essentially in Toronto, where we have, North America's 3rd biggest transit market, and then continuing to provide leadership on EVs. Next slide. I think I've spoken to the timeline already, but I guess what I wanted to acknowledge here is that our initial plan was to launch the service in September of this year. Obviously, we're in a global health pandemic, and reassessing those timelines is something we have to do. We've come up with sort of a set of criteria that our 3 organizations, along with whichever vendor is ultimately selected, will be using to make sure that it's appropriate and safe and feasible to launch, and we'll be sort of tracking those factors over time. So happy to chat more about that if anyone has questions. But for now, I think we can go to the next slide. So I've kind of alluded to this, but the service concept that we did come up with is a first mile, last mile service. We went through a whole process of sort of coming up with site selection criteria. We had a long list, we had a short list. The location we ultimately ended on is in a neighborhood called West Rouge. And so it is outside of the TTC's service coverage area, but it's under 2 kilometers from the Rouge Hill GO station, which is on the Lakeshore East line. We had from some data from Metrolinx the knowledge that there are a large number of people driving less than 2 kilometers to get to that station. So a really interesting use case for an automated shuttle. And there are huge issues with parking, at least pre-COVID. The parking was nearly at capacity at that station. So lots of questions about how that station will continue to attract more riders as the area grows. It is a relatively low traffic volume area of the city as well. That being said, I think probably one of the most bold parts of our service plan is that we are planning to trial in mixed traffic, and I think that's one of the ones that we still need to learn, how that's going to work. And I know that others have sort of thought that maybe it's more appropriate to be focusing automated shuttles on dedicated tracks still. So something we're keeping in mind. We're not anticipating to charge a fare, although any rider would have to pay to get on the GO train as usual when they would arrive at the station. The station does also connect to TTC and Durham Region Transit services. And like Andrew mentioned, we're also anticipating to have an operator on board. Next slide. So I want to say a bit about kind of how we thought about doing procurement, because with the exception of Montreal, to my knowledge, there haven't been any other Canadian cities that have gone through a formal procurement process in order to enter into a contract for the delivery of these services. And City of Toronto is not known for being a nimble and fast mover when it comes to procurement. And we also don't typically procure transit vehicles. And so it's taken a lot of long and detailed work to work with our partners to come up with the criteria for an RFP. What we really wanted to do was do a lot of the homework on all the ways that, if this technology is to be adopted by transit agencies in Canada, it's going to need to meet some pretty high standards, because agencies like TTC have a lot of standards around vehicle durability, accessibility, camera footage, security, all kinds of details. And so we really need to take the time to do that work and articulate what that would look like, because we want to send that signal to the market to say, here's kind of the bar. At the same time, we did build in flexibility by taking a negotiated RFP approach. This is something that hasn't been done very often at the City of Toronto, although it's something, as the sort of broader innovation procurement movement continues, it's something that's becoming more and more common. Anything else I wanted to say here? We can go to the next slide. So in the next couple slides, I'm just going to highlight some key performance objectives we had in our RFP. This is far from being everything, but just to give you a sense of some of, I think, the items that were a little bit more juicy that we focused on and that took some time to develop. So first of all, our service objectives, obviously we're hoping it'll be something that's on time, because the idea is that commuters will be relying on this service to get them to the GO station in the morning and take them home in the afternoon. Our goals around automation are really that the vehicle is able to operate in automated mode for the majority of the trip. So there's a couple different kind of urban environments that the vehicle would be encountering. One is a 2-lane 40-kilometer road that actually just had cycling lanes painted on the side recently. So that's one environment, and then it's entering into quiet residential streets where it's going to be picking up and dropping off passengers. Those are unmarked streets with some stop controlled and some unmarked intersections. And one of the maybe challenges that we anticipate in that environment is there's often a lot of different barriers in the road. So you are allowed to have 3-hour parking on those streets. On garbage day, there's recycling bins everywhere. And there's lots of trees, and we know that leaves through different seasons can be a challenge as well. So I think we've got our work cut out for us. Next slide. Something we spent a long time on was coming up with the right accessibility requirements for the shuttle. So as folks might know, here in Ontario, we have the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and this really sets the bar for, and says that any new service in Ontario must comply with AODA. So that obviously applies to our service. We both looked right at the legislation in terms of what's required, but also because of the benefit of working with 2 transit agencies, we were able to take their standards and pull them into what we're trying to do. Anything else I wanted to say on this? I guess the other piece is that each of our 3 organizations also has an accessibility advisory committees. And so what was nice about the design process is we also had the opportunity to take our early thoughts about what would be appropriate to these folks with lived experience with disabilities and start to have those conversations. As Andrew mentioned, there's lots of interest, especially among visually impaired communities, for what this could mean for the future of transportation. But in order to do that, we can't gloss over some of the nitty-gritty details that need to be integrated in order to truly make these services accessible. Next slide. Privacy is also a big one that for us in transportation services, we don't have as much expertise in. We've been working quite closely with our colleagues in technology services. The city is also in the process of creating a digital infrastructure plan. A lot of different policies and practices ultimately would come out of that would have bearing on automated shuttle projects in the future. But the reality is that because we are entering into a contract with a vendor to provide this service, it will be subject to what's called MFIPA, so the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, because the service will be operating on behalf of a public agency. And so this comes with a sort of additional level of responsibility around privacy and around documentation. One of the big ones is that the collection of video inherently means that you're collecting personal information. And as soon as that's triggered, there are all kinds of things that we have to watch out for. And so part of what we're going to be asking whomever the vendor is that comes on board is to undergo the city's existing privacy impact assessment process. And this is where we're going to look at all the different ways that data is being collected and make sure that we're safeguarding it and that the vendor is safeguarding it in all the ways that are required. Next slide. So I have just 2 more slides. One is some early reflections on what we've learned in the procurement so far. I would say certainly that the reality of doing procurement in a nascent market means that there's just a lot of moving pieces, and it's hard to anticipate exactly where suppliers are going to be at in terms of raising the bar, but raising it to an appropriate level. So certainly I think there's lots of new emerging players as well. So there's a mixed familiarity among just sort of how to do business with a big, heavy agency like the city. Also, because a lot of these products are coming out of other jurisdictions, I would say there's a varying degree of familiarity with things like our accessibility legislation, our Highway Traffic Act, our privacy legislation, and even with our own provincial automated vehicles pilot program. We're seeing, I think, a lot of still moving pieces and different collaborations between both kind of the startups and the vehicle providers, and also some more conventional transit service providers. We heard from Kale this earlier today, but just kind of seeing the different collaborations among industry is really interesting to us. We also are seeing still a wide range of solutions that are being proposed for this first mile, last mile problem. And I think just inherent in the challenge is that we issued a request for information in 2018, got a lot of information through that, but by the time we were able to issue an RFP, it was a year later, and we know that shuttle technology is advancing pretty quick within a 12-month time period. Just a few comments on our partnership as well. I think from our experience, I would say it's just been invaluable to be able to partner fully with our transit agencies on this project because we just have different strengths and different perspectives, and we can really leverage those. The flip side of that is that it does take time. Each of us has our own sort of internal approval processes, and so that we've had to have in place a really strong governance structure, and having someone in the role that I've been able to take on, which is to sort of project manage our steering committee and make sure that we're going through all the review loops. I think dedicated staff becomes really important the bigger that your partnership becomes. Final slide. So these are just my thoughts, and I think I would want to kind of frame this as like my pitch to this group is that I think by working together, we can make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel. So certainly it's not our goal that every city needs to do a pilot like we're doing. We'd like to sort of share as much as we're learning and also, you know, harvest from our peers who have been kind of ahead of the curve and done some of this already. I think part of that is going to be continuing to share the experiences from procurement and making sure we're all building on each other. I think that there's room for industry to become more familiar with local standards and regulations, as I spoke to earlier. And the flip side to that is I think that, you know, the approach we had to take was essentially extracting a lot of RFP requirements from buses and trying to apply them to a shuttle. And it's clear that that's not how we need to do this forever. And that I think a pipe dream would be having some kind of like open shared set of, you know, standards that many of us stakeholders have come up with. And I know that's something that QTRIC is working toward. So those are my thoughts. I guess I'll leave it there and just kind of leave some time for questions.
Thanks, Lindsay, for a great presentation. I'm just checking with Addie to see if you have questions for Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lindsay. Great presentation. Like, the first question I have is you did mention a number of items regarding procurements, and you did mention the RFP process being taken a little bit from the bus procurements and trying to be adapted towards the autonomous shuttles and how it's basically fitting a little bit of a square peg into a round hole sort of process. But like, one of the questions that I do have regarding procurements is if you had the option between looking to buy these shuttles and lease or finance them, is that an option that one, the city of Toronto would consider, and two, in terms of your perspective, having gone through this RFP process, what would you think are the benefits and the drawbacks of like pros and cons of either of those approaches?
Thanks for that question, because I actually forgot to mention a really important detail, which is that we're not actually procuring a vehicle, we're procuring the service. So I don't think that any of our agencies are actually ready to start purchasing these vehicles because we don't have proof of concept yet internally. And so really actually what we're asking for is a vendor to come and provide this service for a fixed period of time. That involves bringing the vehicle, and then once the contract is over, the vehicle moves on. So I don't currently imagine our agencies making a decision to either purchase or lease at this point.
Okay, so if I can make sure that I capture that, so you're purely procuring the service, and it's up to the vendor who's providing the service to determine the vehicle, and also like they own the vehicle and the vehicle will move on after. And that's mainly because the technology and the proof of concept at the moment is still in the developing phase. As we further towards that, we're not quite there yet, but we will eventually get there.
Yeah, all of that is right, except one piece is that we did ask them to specify what vehicle they would be using.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
In the application. So we do have not like that's part of what's evaluated, but you're correct that we need to own it.
Okay. We do have another question from John Conway. He did ask regarding the data metrics. Do you know what data metrics you'll be collecting, and how will you collect this data to learn about passenger perceptions of the shuttle? Will you be using this data for that purpose as well?
Yeah, great question. I guess there's kind of at least two answers to that. One is we have thought through on sort of a technical side what kind of performance data we'd like to be getting. And so a lot of that is around service performance. So is it arriving at the GO station on time? Is it making unexpected stops, and why? What are ridership levels, number of boardings and alightings, and other things like that. In terms of evaluating perception, so another item I forgot to mention, we have two evaluation partners who are part of the project. So that's University of Ryerson and University of Toronto. Ryerson is engaged to do public opinion polling. So they actually did a before poll, it's like GTA, Greater Toronto wide, on general perceptions of AVs in transit. And we're hoping to do a follow-up on that post project. And then University of Toronto is going to be involved in surveys at 3 levels. So with neighbors, with riders, and also with the operators that are on board at 3 different phases through the pilot. So before, during, and after as well, to kind of track everything around perception and satisfaction with the service.
So just to make sure we capture that correctly, there's multiple different types of data that you're looking at from the vehicles loggers themselves. You're looking at technical and service performance data regarding if the vehicle is able to provide the service that you're looking for. And in terms of like the public perception information, that's through 2 university partners, U of T and Ryerson University. And U of T is going to be doing 3 levels with not just the people writing, but also people writing, operators, and neighbors, and other stakeholders who might be involved. And before, during, and after. Ben Ryerson is doing public perception polling.
Got it.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I could mention as well, we did do a round of stakeholder engagement in September of last year. So we were in the community knocking on doors and had a public drop-in session as well. I would say like we were kind of pleasantly surprised by the degree of support and excitement about the project. I think we expected a little bit more skepticism, and I think it's fair to expect that that skepticism might arrive as the, wonderful but imperfect technology hits the road. But I think for a community that has no transit, sort of starting the conversation with, we're proposing a new transit service for your community, what do you think? Definitely led to a lot of interest and excitement.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. We have one more question from Julakovic. He's asked, have you considered providing the service for seniors in residential areas who need transportation to stores or clinics? And could the shuttle buses be used for delivery services as well, apart from just moving passengers, also for moving goods from local stores to residential areas?
Great question. Yeah, so it's actually, there's a really high proportion of seniors living in this community. And one of the pieces of feedback we got from them is our initial proposal was to really have sort of commuter oriented service. So it would be peak hour in the morning, peak hour in the afternoon. And what we heard from a lot of seniors is actually they're aiming to go downtown more around like 10 a.m., 11 a.m. And that's when the parking lot is full. And they would love to be able to get on that shuttle and go to the GO station at that time. And so we have a little bit of wiggle room to kind of play with the service hours and kind of see which ones capture more ridership. So that's definitely a public that we're hoping to serve with this. And it'll take, I think, a little bit of experimenting to figure out how best to do that. There was a second piece. Delivery of goods. Obviously, the project wasn't conceived to do that. We've been keeping an eye on other shuttle deployments that are active in the world right now and noticing that a lot of them are kind of quote unquote pivoting to goods movement. I think it's a fair concern that, we do need to make sure that public health directives allow for folks to enter into a small pod together before we're able to deploy this project. And so we don't currently have plans to use these vehicles to move goods, but other pilots have done that. I've seen, I think it was in Florida, there was a trial that was sort of pivoted to moving medical samples on a hospital campus. And it was kind of a similar kind of vehicle. So I don't think that's out of the realm of the possible. I think in a community or in a service area like ours, one potential application of that could be like movement of groceries. So interestingly, some of the GO stations actually have like a click and collect grocery service now. So if you're taking the GO station home, you can pick up your groceries and do the last mile, often in your car. And so what could it look like to kind of integrate with that system and move those groceries as well? Again, to repeat, that's not actually something that's on the table for us right now, but in general, I think definitely something to consider.
And as a follow-on to that question, we do have one more question as well from Alana Itani, asking if the service, which is running on demand for seniors, could it be run on demand specifically for seniors who might experience difficulty walking to the stops?
Another thing that I maybe didn't fully explain, so we're actually not currently planning to have an on-demand service. So it's actually a fixed schedule model. Okay. We did kind of in the call ask for bidders to tell us what was possible with their technologies around on-demand, but our core proposal is actually more of a fixed service that would be designed to align with the GO station arrivals and departures. Did I answer the whole question there? Was there?
Yeah, I believe the specific question was directed towards if on-demand was being considered and specifically targeted towards the seniors as well, as the use case exists as they might have some difficulty walking to the fixed stop within the routes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that hasn't been determined yet either is the actual detailed location of the fixed stops. And so that's one of the items that we're going to be going back for a second round of community consultations when we can. And that's one of the pieces that we're going to need to put on the table then.
Right. Sounds great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. I don't see any further questions, but that was a great presentation, and there's clearly interest amongst all of our stakeholders for your project, as shown by all the questions. And I do believe Josipa does have a question. Yeah. I saw you unmute yourself.
We do have a follow-up question on our end. So Lindsay, since we have you to exploit your brains, and we've talked a little bit about this with you before, the origin of our national smart vehicle project several years ago was a similar origin story to our electric bus project, which is there's safety in numbers. So if we get a couple cities together and transit agencies together, not only do you get better price points with joint procurement, but given that it's such new technology, we can drive standardization and we can drive manufacturers to redesign to the city need, rather than having these one-off proprietary solutions that become very challenging over the long term. So same origin story for this smart vehicle project, where we started with the idea of 4 to 5 cities banding together to do a joint procurement, not for the sake primarily of a joint procurement and price point, though that is a benefit, but really to get interoperability and standardization of the vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure communications, as well as the control panel. So the digital control panel that says, where is your Navia vehicle or your Easy Mile vehicle or your To Get There vehicle? Where is it? How's it operating? And can it all flow into one portal that a transit agency could control as a meta level portal, rather than having different proprietary portals to control these digital vehicles? So that was the origin of the story. And fast forward to where we are, we've gone through this period of all these pilots, lots of the challenges that Andrew identified and Clement identified, and which we're about to hear from our colleagues in Utah, lots of practical challenges that could be overcome. But we're still at the position of saying, you know, does it make sense to do a joint procurement in the interest of cities doing interoperability and standardization? From your perspective, as we've discussed, it differs from buses in that we're not looking to buy the assets, because it doesn't really make sense in this case. It makes sense to buy or lease the service. But is there still benefit in pursuing a joint procurement of a purchase of a service that pursues interoperability and standardization? So I'll put that to you, because TTC is really at the, you know, you're kind of at the end of all these pilots, so you get the benefit of learning from them all, heading into a joint procurement to deploy a service. What's the next step, and would the next step down the road, you know, make sense to do a joint service procurement in the interest of the taxpayer and deployment and standardization?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm really excited about the QTRIC initiative, and second of all, I feel like my colleagues from TTC could provide an even more robust answer. But what I would say is, while I feel not too strongly on like joint procurement versus not, I feel quite strongly about standardization and like a move toward standards that we all understand and that we don't have to reinvent from scratch. Like having put together the 100-page RFP as a non-expert in, you know, transit vehicle doors, I can say that like things are going to move a lot faster if we're able to do that. And so I think if joint procurement is a means to getting to that stage, then I think it has a lot of value. Mm-hmm. I can also say, I mean, part of our team's mandate, and actually part of what we've used the funding from Transport Canada for, as well as actually commissioning a study on the economic development potential of automated transit and actions the city could take to attract more of this kind of activity. And through that, we've been able to have some interesting conversations with TTC as well. And I think it's just really important to highlight that like big transit agencies want to be innovative, but at the end of the day, they are risk averse in how they procure, because if you buy buses that the door gums up after 3 years, like it's a big problem. And so a lot of the standards they have or concerns they might have with new vehicles have relatively little to do with the automation component, and a lot to do with, is this a robust and functional transit vehicle we can rely on and that will plug into our system? And so I think those are some realities to keep top of mind as we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the story of our lives, you know, essentially at QTRIC, looking at transit. Transit's not funded to do technology innovation, right? That's not its job. It's funded to deliver a service that's reliable and robust and on time. And yet we have all these needs for innovation, for climate action, for mobility, for anti-congestion. And the two things don't match easily. So you can have these great champions at transit agencies, but they don't have the money for higher risk projects that have a higher level of failure, which you have to walk into accepting in order to deploy these kinds of technologies and move the needle. So story of our lives, and we're excited to work with champions like TTC and Toronto to move towards something that's a middle ground, right? With the safety and numbers that comes when you do a joint effort in order to get manufacturers to design to the needs of the city. So with that, Lindsay, I really want to appreciate and say thank you to you for your commentary. We do have a question from Carlos. We're running into our break, and we're always criticized for not giving folks enough breaks, and we know that, we've absorbed that. So we do want to give people a 4-minute break here. So Carlos, we're going to come back to your question in the next presentation, because I think our colleague from Utah will be able to respond to that as well. well. We're going to turn to a break right now, and folks, we're going to keep running on our end on the back end. We're going to give you 4 minutes to stand up, get your coffee, stretch yourself out, and let your blood flow. And we'll resume at 3:35 p.m. Eastern Time with our colleague Shayna Quinn from Utah's, the city of Utah, talking about Utah's autonomous shuttle pilot project. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll resume in about 3.5 minutes. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. We gave you ever such a minuscule break, and what we're going to do is resume the agenda in just about a minute here. We'll give everybody just a second to get back to their chairs. We'll start at about 3:36 Eastern PM. And with that, I'm just going to check in on audio one more time. Adi, can we hear you clearly?
Yep, I'm able to hear you, Jasper.
Perfect. And Elnaz, we'll check in with your audio as well.
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, so what we're going to do in a moment here, folks, as we're just resuming from our little health break, we're going to share the screen there again, and we'll start off with a presentation per the agenda with our colleague Shayna Miran Quinn. And with that, Elnaz, I'm going to turn it to you to introduce Shayna.
Sorry, I'm just checking if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. Great. Okay, so our next speaker is Shayna Mirren-Quinn from Utah Transit Authority. Shayna is a researcher at Utah's Innovative Mobility Solutions Office. She's currently co-managing a one-year autonomous shuttle pilot in partnership with the Utah Department of Transportation. Shayna is joining us from the US today. Over to you, Shayna.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, thanks, Elnaz, and thank you for organizing this conference. It's a great opportunity to learn from other Canadian and US colleagues. If you would please go to the next slide. So I work with the Utah Transit Authority. UTA is the public transit provider for Salt Lake City and lots of urban and rural regions here. We go northern to Ogden and down south to a city called Provo. We run about 400 buses, light rail, streetcar, commuter rail. And just for like a sense of scope, last year we carried about 150,000 riders each day. About 2 years ago, UTA initiated our Innovative Mobility Solutions group, and that's part of my team. And our mission is to test promising ideas that can make transit better, faster. For this pilot, we partnered with the Utah Department of Transportation. The image that you see is a shot of Salt Lake City looking on a multi-use corridor where we've got trains and buses, lots of vehicle traffic. It's turning into a more walkable pedestrian environment. And so this is an example of how our agencies like to work together to just make it easier to get around. And finally, our vendor partner was selected as Easy Mile. Easy Mile is a French company, and their United States headquarters is in Denver, Colorado, which is not far from Utah. Next slide, please. A good introduction to our pilot project is through this short 2-minute video. So Alana, if you don't mind navigating to the video.
So we'll give it a go, Shayna, if you can just bear with us for one moment, so we can get the video up and running.
No worries.
Utah Department of Transportation, in partnership with the Utah Transit Authority, has launched an autonomous shuttle pilot in Utah.
We look at this as another opportunity for us to help the nation, help the world of transportation as a whole.
Autonomous vehicles for us could be an important connection for our riders between our main types of service and the rest of the system or their final destination.
Automated vehicles have the potential to remove human error from the crash equation, which will protect drivers and passengers, as well as bicyclists and pedestrians.
94% of the crashes that occur are human error. This connected autonomous vehicle technology can react much faster than any human driver can.
There's an opportunity here to demonstrate that this technology can take away some of that human error and improve the overall safety of transportation.
So we're going to be moving it around the state to different locations so that the public has a chance to experience it.
Come out and explore, test these vehicles with us, give us your opinion on how it works. Is this a solution that you would like to see UTA and UDOT expand upon? Work with communities, work with office parks, different areas to see if autonomous vehicles can really be a part of our package of solutions for transportation for Utah.
To learn more about Utah's autonomous shuttle pilot, visit www.avshuttleutah.com and follow along to see when the shuttle will be in your area.
That's great. So back over to you, Shannon. It'll just take 1 minute for the screen to reappear.
All right, sounds good. So that video was produced when we kicked off the pilot. We're now about 80% complete. So we had planned 12 months of operation, 1 year, and we've got about 2 months left. And that video helped introduce the whole pilot concept to our stakeholders and to the community. So why are we doing this? Safety is the key factor. We know that automation can decrease human error. And in the United States, over 38,000 people die on our roads every year. So every step we can take towards reducing those accidents is in the right direction. Adding new mobility options is important because not everyone can drive or wants to drive. And of course, we're focused on the last mile problem, as a lot of us are. We're looking for more efficient transportation in the forms of shared transportation because it helps decrease congestion, it leverages our transit network, it can complement our larger, faster trains and buses cost effectively. And finally, we're reaching out to the public and asking, do you see something like this as part of the future of transportation? And how do you feel about it? The image there is, it was taken from one of our operating sites at the University of Utah campus. And there we ran the shuttle on a combination of sidewalks without a dedicated path, but shared with other pedestrians and skateboarders, sometimes cyclists, and in mixed traffic on campus roads shared with private vehicles, delivery vehicles. So it was a challenging environment. Next slide, please. So we're operating this tour over 10 locations in about 12 months, seeking out different environments, different demographics, and various travel needs. We're running at initially a test track and then a mountain resort, the university, conference centers, a business park, a shopping district, and part of the state capitol grounds. So lots of different locations. And we're looking to gain experience in these operations to understand better what are the limits of the technology and frankly, in kind of the form factor itself and what's the overall performance. We're also testing with UDOT connected vehicle technology, looking at V2I or vehicle to infrastructure use cases. We're evaluating how well does it meet our riders' needs. And then we contracted with Easy Mile to operate the shuttle, and the image there is of one of the operators about to board the shuttle. That wasn't the plan originally. UTA had intended to handle the operations, but we had to solve some problems, and Easy Mile stepped in as a great partner and helped us with the operations. Throughout the pilot, safety has been our top priority. At every location, we had a site-specific safety plan and worked with Easy Mile to mitigate the risks at each site. And we also had a stable throughout the project incident response plan that identified if there were a problem, who to call, and in kind of what flow, like the decision-making flow. The procurement was run as a trial procurement through UDOT. They kind of spearheaded that effort and we coordinated with them. It was an 18-month procurement process that they have available, up to 18 months, and they issued an invitation for services. It was fairly light, but this is a way that they can find special products or services that are new, and they just ask the vendors, tell us how you would do this, how you would provide this service, and what are your costs. And we received a handful of responses, and Easy Mile was selected as the best value. Next slide, please. So how's it going? That's an image of the shuttle in one of its storage locations. It could be charged there overnight. It was temperature controlled, nice high garage doors, and that's really essential in this pilot. But overall, it's done really well. About 98% of the time, it's driving all by itself. The other 2%, we're navigating manually around sometimes illegal or improperly parked vehicles, or the operator is smoothing out the ride as pedestrians or cyclists cut too close to the shuttle. We've seen over 6,000 riders so far. We're tracking riders per hour just as we do on transit, and our target here was about 10 people per hour. That's similar to like a low performing suburban bus, and we're over that so far. And we're pleased to see that based on the electricity usage, it's only costing about $2 a day to charge. It's exciting to us because after labor, our second largest cost is fuel. We buy a lot of diesel fuel. Next slide, please. Some of the successes you'll see in that picture, it's just how curious the public has been. The operator gets nonstop questions from riders. People are intrigued by the novelty of it, and frankly, they're lining up in a lot of cases to ride. And then on the right, there's a map of one of our deployments at a retail mixed-use transit shopping area. We only had 3 stops. It was about a 1.7 kilometer route. And stop number 3 was at a grocery store. Stop 1 is the train station. And this was a hot summer day. We were only running for 3 weeks, but we were on the shuttle when a gentleman boarded with a heavy sack of groceries and a gallon of milk. And he took the shuttle directly to the train and boarded the train and went home. And so we saved him from a hot walk through asphalt and broken concrete in places to get to the train. And that's exciting because transit is meant to be useful. And we could see clearly this is a use case for something like this to be in operation. Next slide, please. Other successes, you'll see that picture of the transit app screen. We were able to do a test with transit, sending our real-time data so that our customers could see when the shuttle would arrive and they could plan a trip that would connect them to the shuttle. So providing great customer information based on the actual operations is one of our goals. Having this vehicle be, have the accessible features were really important so that we could have riders of all ages and abilities try it out. Safety, we appreciated the redundant safety features on the EZ10. We know through use that when the vehicle is on its trajectory, it stays put. And if it detects an obstacle, it responds immediately. We have taken hundreds of surveys from our customers and we're finding strong public acceptance, and I'll get into that a little bit more. And then the vehicle to infrastructure tested was done, it was done with simulated traffic lights on a closed course, and we'll have more information in a final report with that, that test portion. We're also working with a university to better understand how humans interact with this type of vehicle, how they anticipate what it's going to do, and we're focused on kind of the psychology of how people respond to it. Next slide, please. So what are we hearing from riders? We've asked everyone who took the survey, is there anything that makes you hesitant about seeing these self-driving vehicles on the roads? And you see a mix of, you know, people are they're gonna distract the vehicle or bug it. The slow speed has come up a lot. And then there's a lot of optimism, but as I was crunching kind of an interim report data, I found that the #1 response was actually nothing. So people who are telling us they're riding the shuttle and they're saying, actually, I don't have any concerns. So that's pretty interesting. And then the approval rating, the star rating is pretty high, well, close to 5 stars, 4.7. Next slide, please. We were hopeful that as people experienced the shuttle, they would have a better attitude towards autonomous vehicle technology, and we found that that's true 95% of the time. Almost everyone, 98%, have told us that they felt safe on the shuttle. And then we asked them, what if we took that friendly human attendant off the shuttle? How would you feel then? And yes, there's a 17-point drop, but still 4 out of 5 riders are still comfortable boarding without an attendant. Next slide, please. Of course, we've had our challenges, just like all the others. When it snows, the image with the pine tree was taken at Park City Mountain Resort, and a snowfall like this, it was kind of moderate. We had to suspend operations because the shuttle perceived the snowflakes as an obstacle and it just wouldn't run. However, the sunshiny, snowy image, we were able to run a route. The vehicle stayed on its route and just slowed down a little bit because it was packed snow, a little bit icy. Just as you might slow down your walk in that condition, the vehicle did the same thing. So it didn't necessarily stop the vehicle when the weather was bad, but yeah, that was one of our learnings. It runs just fine on packed snow without like falling snowfall. Next slide, please. So a vehicle like this, and we've got a warning sticker affixed to it. We had to alert the public that if there's an obstacle in front, certainly if it's a child, or it seems like in every media event, there's an elected official who wants to walk in front of the shuttle and make sure that it does stop, it will stop. But that's an emergency stop. And so it's very abrupt, and you only want that to happen in a true emergency. So we're hoping in the next generation that the LiDARs, the sensitivity will be dialed back, or that the filtering is more discerning, so that it recognizes an obstacle that is a human, or a creature, a living creature, versus flower petals or snowflakes. The low speed, one of the reasons it is running so slow is for safety, but when we include stops, our average speed is about 3 miles per hour. And that's fine for low speed applications, but other places it doesn't work so well. In transit, we're looking for reliability at 95% or higher due to weather and some occasional mechanical issues like needing to replace the battery. So far, our pilot reliability is between 80 and 90%. So it's getting there. We also have not had an opportunity yet to test fare collection. And because we've gone to so many sites, that's great in terms of getting awareness of the public in lots of different communities, but we spent a lot of time answering the where questions. Where do we store it? Where do we run it? Where are the stops? And how do we get it done at each site? We had to install, special signage and mapping for everything. So it's a big lift to move it around that much in a short amount of time. Next slide, please. Our key takeaways is that the public is enthusiastic about this technology. That photo was from, it was kind of a park and display opportunity at a science, technology, engineering, and math student conference. And so young people boarded, and you can see the amazement in their faces. It was really fun to educate them about this shuttle. Almost everybody, this is their first interaction with a vehicle that's self-driving. So we're glad to put something like this in front of the public. It does need a dedicated corridor to run most efficiently and safely. And unlike our buses and trains, we can't drive this back to the garage. So you need to have a good storage spot. I'm getting a note that there are 3 minutes left, so I'm going to pick up the pace a little. Looking ahead, we recognize that this is a useful and viable opportunity. We're going to keep testing it. Please go ahead. Next slide. In the second phase, we're going to build on what we've learned. So we're starting to develop plans for a phase 2 pilot. In this second phase, we're going to spend all of our time, 1 year at one site, and fully integrate it into our transit network, including testing fare collection. And we would like to, over several months, gradually move to a no operation or teleoperation service. We're looking to get to 0 disengagements to do that, of course. Some potential partners are, again, we'd love to work with Easy Mile and UDOT and bring in Salt Lake City. We've already received partial funds through a Utah Clean Air grant. Next slide, please. In addition, we're exploring other opportunities in parallel. So in the US, there's a group sponsored by CalSTART called the Connected and Automated Transportation Users Forum. And we're in the process of, well, we've issued an RFI. This is a cohort of 14 US agencies for a next generation purpose-built transit autonomous vehicle, so a level 4 or above vehicle. The deadline to respond is next Friday, and we've received interest, questions, and like there was an informational webinar held a couple weeks ago and attendees in that. So manufacturers are starting to check that out. Concurrently, UTA is studying lower levels of automation, levels 1 through 3, and how that can benefit, say, a driver assist features, our operations. And of course, we need to procure vehicles, if we're using federal funds, that meet ADA or Americans with Disabilities Act requirements. So a fully accessible vehicle would be of interest to us. And then technology, as everyone knows, it improves every couple of months. So as it's market ready, we'd like to find ways to implement it for better transportation sooner for our riders. Next slide, please. Well, this is kind of our unofficial pilot motto. When you collaborate with other partners, it takes a little bit longer, but we're going to go far together. And I have one more quote there. This is my personal inspiration. If you could click, please. One more time. Great. So our vision is we're just getting started. This is the equivalent in the autonomous space of the Model T. That quote came from Grace Hopper, who in the 1950s was involved with computer science. In her time, they thought computers could just do arithmetic. So it's very early, and it's exciting to be working with this type of technology. And that's it. Next slide is just thanks. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, China, and that was a great presentation. Thank you so much for sharing. We have a number of questions I see in the Q&A box, but before we get started, a quick question from us at Qtrick. So we do see your next steps ahead in terms of moving from this pilot onto your next second pilot, and how you're going to move forward, and the funding that you're looking at for that second stage pilot. But for Utah to move from the pilot stage towards a larger procurement, would in your opinion is what needs to happen for them to move from pilot to a larger stage procurement? And also, in light of the current situation that we're all facing, like, has COVID had an impact on your planning between the first pilot and how you're going to move forward to the second pilot and onwards?
These are good, timely questions. So for us to move towards a larger procurement, we essentially need two things to happen. One, in the US, we need the vehicle to meet the ADA requirements and also something called federal motor vehicle safety standards. That means it has to be crash tested and roadworthy. And then we can apply for federal funding. In the US, there's a lot of grants and innovative funding opportunities that we would like to apply for. I think it was wise, another speaker said that although transit agencies are getting asked to do more innovative projects, they're not set up to pay for them. And so those federal funding opportunities are key to us succeeding in trying new technologies. Your other question about the health crisis. So as we're in the process of restarting operations, we have looked to our trains and buses and those procedures to implement stepped up cleaning, disinfecting, personal protective equipment, and social distancing on the vehicle. Travel demand has fallen a lot, so we're not expecting to have 14 people on the shuttle that often. And Easy Mile has also contributed their plan, and so we're working with our partners to restart operations using those new guidelines.
So just make sure I capture that correctly, like in terms of what needs to happen in order for you to move towards a larger procurement. On the technology side, the vehicle needs to meet ADA requirements and also road safety requirements in terms of crash testing and crash safety. So those are sort of some steps that need to be looked at. And on the funding side, you're looking at, well, the cost of these technologies are fairly significant, and transit is built to deliver a service while innovation is required. That's not their initial mandate. So you are looking at multiple different funding opportunities in order to ensure that you are able to move forward with your next pilot and also like the next steps forward beyond that. And in light of COVID, you are looking towards your bus and rail systems as they're operating and their operational procedures that they're using there in terms of the cleaning and ensuring social distancing. And you don't foresee that as transit ridership has dropped, there isn't a projection for the 14 riders on the shuttle, and you're also working closely with your partner Easy Mile in order to determine the social distancing requirements as you get back up and running.
That's right. I'll just add that we're anticipating no more than 4 riders at a time on the shuttle going forward. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. We do have a number of other questions as well from our participants. So one of the questions that we did have is we had a question from Carlos asking what was the criteria to choose Easy Mile over the other providers. I know you touched on this a little bit in terms of how you approach it, but could you delve a little bit more deeper into that?
Oh my gosh, this was 12 months ago, but let me see what I can recall. We were looking for the vendor's experience and seeing that, Easy Mile had many deployments throughout the world and in the US. That was reassuring, and a clear safety record, and just, the technology is there, the project management knowledge was there as well. And then the vehicle itself does meet a lot of our needs in terms of accessibility and kind of a public transit build and focus for multiple riders. So yeah, it was just in our case the best fit.
Okay, so if I could just see if I captured that correctly, EasyMile had a lot of experience in demonstrating a lot of these technologies, and they had a lot of the knowledge in terms of the project management that you were looking for, and the technology itself as well was a good fit for the specific requirements that the UTA was looking for.
That's right.
Okay, we have another question regarding from Carlos regarding the pilot. So based on the economics of the pilot that you operated, you mentioned a little bit on the costs associated with the fueling itself being the second largest cost for transit. Would you extend this into a commercial service, or is it still a little early days to determine that?
Well, we're still in the pilot itself, so it's preliminary analysis, but I can say when we look at the ongoing operating costs, remove the capital, remove the cost of the vehicle itself, if you can have a single operator who monitors remotely 2, 3, 4 vehicles at once, it's looking like a pretty cost-effective solution.
Okay. Okay, if I could summarize that really quickly, like at the moment you're still in the pilot state, so it's hard to determine. But if you could have one operator remotely controlling multiple vehicles, then the economics start to make a lot more sense.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So we have a question from Pramil from the city of Montreal. He did ask that number of AV operators, AV companies are protective about their data. So how did you approach this data sharing arrangement with EasyMile?
I think it was just part of the agreement. The data, as we're the project sponsors, it belongs to us. We've received lots of performance data, and it's invaluable to assessing, how the vehicle's running.
Okay, so if I capture that correctly, like the data regarding the operation of the vehicles, like that was negotiated or that was included as part of the procurement process.
Yes,
it is invaluable. Okay. We have a question from Farah Shah regarding the demonstration sites. As you chose multiple demonstration sites, like how long does setup for the AV at each of the demonstration sites take? Like, was that a consideration?
Yes, you have to build that into the schedule as well. At most, setup would take maybe 2 weeks. In reality, our team was able to get it done generally faster, maybe 3 days to program and map each route. I will say that there were some sites we had on the short list and we intended to run at, but they were too complex. For example, we wanted to run at one of our major transfer points at a hospital, but there was too much car and vehicle and pedestrian traffic. It was ruled out, so we went to a different site instead.
Okay, and as a follow-on to that question, is the last question, did certain locations perform better than others, and were there any specific criterion with those locations that you could identify that caused them to perform better in terms of business model?
Well, gosh, I mean, performance based on ridership is one aspect. And then performance in terms of the vehicle running smoothly and self-driving most of the time is another aspect. And frankly, they kind of worked against each other. Where we had the most ridership, I think there was a lot of manual intervention just because it was like a chaotic site with lots of people everywhere. And where the vehicle was able to run most autonomously, it was a calmer, like a convention center site type environment, whereas mostly on sidewalks. So they're kind of trade-offs. Do you want the vehicle doing more self-driving, or do you want more customer interactions?
Okay, so if I captured that correctly, that depends on how you would classify the performance. Would it be in terms of ridership, a number of people that rode the vehicle, or in terms of the amount of in terms of the quality of service provided versus the number of stops and so on of the self-driving capability? And like ridership versus that tend to like operate in opposite directions, as generally when there's more ridership, there's a lot more people around. There could be additional factors as people are amazed by these new technologies and they're causing traffic and a little bit of chaos.
Yes, that's been our experience.
Okay, perfect. And before Elnaz wags a finger at me, I do want to check in with her, see if I am running right on time.
Yeah, we are a little bit over time. So if you can quickly turn to Mahmoud. Mahmoud is our last speaker. So over to you, Mahmoud.
All right, with that, thank you so much.
Thanks, Shana, for the great presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was fantastic, Raina. Shayna, thank you so much. So over to you, Mahmoud. We'll move into the final portion of the presentation today.
Yeah, thank you very much. And hello, everyone. I want to keep my video off and to make sure that my voice, the quality of voice is okay. So could you please, yeah, thank you very much. Could you please start from the beginning? Yeah, thank you. So today I'm going to present about transit automation experts and expertise feedback, focusing on the cost, financing, and procurement options. This presentation is in continuation of the previous presentation about we collected interview and we did interview with different stakeholders. We collected feedbacks and then we did some more in-depth analysis. Next slide, please. So a quick overview about this project. The objective of this project is we want to identify the opportunities, challenges, and solutions allied to automated transit technology deployment in Canada. So far, we interviewed 14 stakeholders, and we want to continue this one. The interview started in February 2020 with an expected completion by July 2020, but it depends on the situation with the COVID-19 situation. Everything is going to be a little bit slow these days, but we're trying to capture all the interview planned as much as possible. We have participants from different stakeholders with different expertise, including manufacturers, transit agencies, consulting companies, from academia, cities, and government. Next slide, please. So we collected all the interview data and we conducted some qualitative analysis. And next slide, please. So the methodology that we follow for this study, first of all, we design a semi-structured framework interview, which is a kind of interactive between the people that are involved in this survey and questions. We designed 12 questions and with some follow-up questions for after these kind of questions. So the qualitative research that we did out of this data was kind of a content analysis, and all the data are coded in a software known as the NVivo, and we run a thematic analysis to capture what is the underlying criteria of a different perspective that we are collecting from our stakeholders. Next slide, please. So data are coded in 6 main themes for each of these opportunities, and then challenges, and then solutions. The main themes are economic, environmental, social, operational, technological, and also policy and planning. Next slide, please. So for a thematic analysis that we run here, we wanted to know the frequency of themes as from different perspectives. As you can see from this graph, for example, in the category of the opportunities, what is the highest percentage of opportunity that we can get if we want to deployment this type of the smart vehicles. As you can see, the highest percentage or highest benefit that we can get is related to the operational, as for example, the first mile or last mile solution, or even sometimes to address in those areas that we have a very low coverage and we have a low demand, and it is not cost effective to run big vehicles for those areas. This is going to the next kind of category for us, which is the social. The social benefit is coming from different perspective. People with less able body, they can now have access to these kind of vehicles because these are the part of the solution for the transit. And then the other categories are related to the technology benefit, economic, planning and policy. And the last one, but not the least one, is the environmental, because they are electrical vehicles. So for sure, we are reducing the GHG emission, which is the main challenge for the government. Next slide, please. So for the challenging, we did this analysis as well. As you can see, the main challenge that we are facing and we got from our stakeholders' feedback is related to the socials. It means that people in general, they have some concern about this technology. They have a concern about the privacy, about the security, and the other aspects. I can see from the presentation, many of the users, they have a positive about this technology. But we are talking about in general, also non-users, also they have a concern. And one of the reasons could be we need to have much more pilot programs to promote these kind of technologies. The second main challenge is related to the planning and policy. So it means we have a kind of challenge about the regularity, about the standardization, and all the policymakers need to think about this seriously. And the others are about the technology, operational, and economic. Could you please click here? Yeah, here I want to kind of emphasize that during the analysis, we separated the technology and operational, but in reality, they are sort of connected to each other. So for example, if you want to go for some mixed traffic, or some of our presenters, they mentioned about left turn, or some of them are mentioning about the weather conditions, some of them related to the operational and some of them related to the technology itself. So if we want to mix up these two themes together, that would cover the bigger portion of our challenges as well. Next slide, please. So the last frequency analysis we did was about the solution, and our stakeholders are thinking the main solution should be part of the planning and policy. It means we need a kind of framework for regulatory and the framework for to set up the standardization, and we need a kind of policy thinking about different perspective about deployment of these shuttles. The second solution mainly is about the economic. We will get back about this in more detail through the presentation. And the others are about the solution and technology itself. Next slide, please. So we did a little bit more in-depth analysis about this financial perspective. So first of all, let's quick review what are the main opportunities that we can get from this deployment of these shuttles. So in the long term or in the long run, public transit would be available at a lower cost. That would be cheap for more people. We will reduce the operation cost. At the end, we want to reduce the labor cost. That would be also lower expense for the cities, and we're going to cost reduction of supporting this new technology as we move forward, because technology would be available much easier in the future. And we will have a cost reduction for small cases, because for many of our cases, small cases, transit agency have to run a larger vehicle, which is not necessary. Next slide, please. So in terms of the challenging of this economic, we know that we have a high upfront purchase price for this type of vehicles. Cities being risk averse in spending public money, especially transit agencies, because they are governmental as well. Public funding for infrastructure is a major challenge. We will get back about this, because some of our hidden costs are coming from this part, because the price of vehicle itself is one story, but we have lots of story about the infrastructure if we want to move toward smart cities in the future. There is a lot of competition in different disciplines for government funding and R&D, especially with these days COVID-19 situation. Lots of funding are going to that part. And financing the business case should be viable in the long run, because many of our pilot projects are short term. So there isn't a kind of enough business kind of appetite for this part. And the other thing that is related to mainly in Canada is pay foreign exchange rate, mainly USD dollar, because there are no AV show market in Canada. So some of our manufacturers, they have a problem if they want to run this pilot program in Canada. Next slide, please. So we did some analysis to figure out what are the main themes out of these economic challenges. So when we run the analysis, we figure out that the main category of the challenge for the economics are related to the high upfront cost and hidden cost. followed by spending public money for transit funding because they don't have a kind of dedicated funding for this kind of deployment. Government needs to help them. And then all these cases should be viable in the long run, and the funding availability, especially for this situation that we have a pandemic globally. Next slide, please. So in terms of the solution, when we run the analysis, we figure out different category for the proposed challenging about this economic part. Some of them stakeholders and also the content that we analysis, we came up that the main category would be about the government support. Government can support from different grants. They can support the R&D, they can support the pilot, they can support the transit agency in order to have more these pilot programs. And the second solution about the economy that we think is a kind of innovative approach is a P3 model, public-private partnership. Some of our stakeholders insist that that could be a very good solution if you want to move towards a business case. And then we need to have dedicated funding for transit agencies, especially if we want to go to kind of innovative approach for transit agency. We need to have a dedicated funding for that part. The other thing is about the political mandates. So it's coming to us that whether government and cities are interested by providing some funding and invest in smart shuttles. So that is a kind of a solution that's related to the decision making in a high level for the government. And the other solution is about the green funding, because the green funding, these pilot and these smart shuttles are electrical shuttles. So for sure, some of this funding can come from that side because we are reducing the GHG emission at the end of the day. Next slide, please. So out of this all the analysis, we came up with some main consideration and some recommendation part of all that. So from the governmental key consideration is government should at the end of the day promote this smart and advanced public transit solution funding, because we believe the future solution again would be transit and shared mobility. Otherwise, we are adding much more vehicle to the street without reducing the congestion. So we need to promote this one as much as possible. And about the key funding consideration, one of the things that we found is transit agencies. We need to show that transit agency can actually reduce the operating cost by integrating a shuttle with the transit system. One method could be we need to have a robust cost-benefit analysis based on the real data that our smart shuttles pilot programs are running. And in terms of the deployment, our analysis is showing that it is time to move developing prototype vehicles toward more commercially available vehicles, which is good for the people and also for the government by considering some safety standards. Next slide, please. So in terms of the infrastructure, as I mentioned during the presentation, it needs a kind of huge funding because these are part of the whole project and the whole system if you want to run it connected and quite smoothly. So we need to establishing a strong collaboration across public and private players to determine ownership, operation, and maintenance in order to have a kind of successful system. And the last but not the least is about the P3 model, which is provide the budgetary stability. And we think that can help us to have a transfer of risk with the participants, and the participant can only think about the risk on those areas that they are experts. So in conclusion, I think everything is connected and we need to have a kind of system thinking in order to have a successful pilot program. Thank you very much. I wanted to make it quick as much as possible since we are running out of time.
Thank you so much, Mahmoud. We have a couple of questions that our participants have posed. So I'm going to try to, if you could keep your answers brief so that we could go through next steps and not take people too much over time. One of the questions was how many stakeholders were interviewed. And as a follow-on to that, were the stakeholders who were interviewed, were the people who were interviewed, who were participating in the survey, were they, what type of vehicle were they asked about?
Yeah, so far we finished 14 stakeholders across the country. And mainly we talk about the smart vehicles. So it is about low speed smart shuttles that we are talking about, which is the main part of the project that we are running at the Q-Trick now.
And were there any specifics that were asked regarding the vehicle itself, like in terms of the business model, the vehicle type, or the capacity?
Yeah, because some of them are from manufacturers. So we ask about the specific type of their vehicles and the size of the vehicles, but mainly they are the typical smart shuttles, which is covering until 12 passengers, and then which is part of the transit system in the future as well.
And I think, Mahmoud, it's worthwhile for us to add the methodology so that folks are aware. We use a semi-structured methodology.
Yes.
And so Mahmoud and Alnaz developed a series of structured questions, but then allowed for participants to engage in discursive dialogue that was off topic to some extent in order to capture feedback around issues not captured in the structured questions. And out of that methodology was a lot of rich data, some of which Mahmoud just presented. I think a critical element to note to folks is we're packaging this all up right now in a white paper. It will be published this summer. There's a lot more data than what is just provided in this presentation. And it basically provides a 2020 gut check on what are people thinking when it comes to getting into these shuttles, experimenting with these shuttles, piloting them, and procuring them from a transit manufacturer and user perspective, now that there's been several years of piloting and some ongoing piloting that people are learning from. And the results, I would say, are quite different from had we done the survey and interviews in 2016, 2017. So there's some good comparative outcomes that allow us to build a better procurement plan ahead. Mahmoud, is there anything you want to add there about the methodology?
No, more or less all this you mentioned already, and also during the presentation I mentioned. And this is very interactive because we are following up with different questions because we want to capture as much information as possible that can help us to do more in-depth analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the folks who were interviewed are on the line today, in particular transit agencies, as we keep reaching out to more of them. So Adi, I'll turn back to you. I think we have one more question here that's been posed.
Yep, we have a couple of questions actually. One of the questions is by Jolikovich, who asks, we do need more private and public partners to have successful pilot programs. Do we have any automotive companies in North America who are interested in developing a vehicle and participating in a pilot?
Yeah, I'll answer that one. And Mahmoud, feel free to jump in from your lit review. But, you know, at Q-Trick, we've often reached out as far back as 2015, 2016. We integrated the automotive sector in our consultation sessions. And in fact, when we started this project in 2016, we specifically invited General Motors, Chrysler, Toyota, the core manufacturers that are operational in Canada. Now, albeit in Canada, we have branch plants and not the core R&D centers that Michigan in the United States has. But nonetheless, we invited those automakers in North America that are active and have R&D centers in the North American landscape. Back in 2016, 2017, the interest purely from our automotive sector at those consultation sessions was in automotive automation for personal passenger cars. It was very clear in a massive report we wrote for what was at that time Industry Canada federally, that there just wasn't interest from our automakers in North America in shared shuttles that are low speed. Fast forward to 2020, the circumstance has changed. We have Toyota explicitly active in the shuttle and bus market. So they now have their automated and electrified shuttle/bus product line that's available. The extent to which that will be designed in North America is an open question, but it's part of the Japanese and Toyota strategy for the future of shared mobility. We have tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers like Magna actively moving into on-demand services that they're looking to potentially automate in the future. And then, of course, we have the whole shift to new mobility of all the automakers active in North America and in Canada. But the question to which they're actively moving into low-speed automated shared shuttles for public deployment outside of Toyota is a big question mark right now. I would say those announcements we saw in 2018, 2019 around this were superficial at best. They were kind of indications of where the strategy might go if the market really dramatically picked up in that space. So I would say if we had to bet the mortgage on it, it would be around Toyota being the leader in that space, and we've certainly engaged them. Although I have to say General Motors has reached out recently with a renewed interest in this space. I do believe that the future of automotive is in the shared mobility sector this century, so we will be working to integrate them more and more going forward. So that is a quick answer on that one. And Mahmoud, I'm not sure if you want to add anything last on the automotive sector.
No, it's perfect. So you already mentioned all parts.
Yeah, and so Carlos, to your question, do I trust the auto sector in that regard? I mean, I just articulated what I think the timeline is, and this, you know, the public announcements versus the actual R&D investment. So with that, we'll turn back to Adi and Elnaz as we're running out of time. Thanks so much, Mahmoud, for that overview. And Elnaz, turn to you for next steps and conclusions.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Mahmoud, and thank you to all speakers today. We only have 4 minutes left, so I quickly review next steps and QTRIC's 2020 strategies for smart vehicle projects. So as we are identifying a technical specification and project vision, we're going to identify final coalition of the wheeling for this joint procurement and identify MOU partners by mid-July this year, and to build a basis for memorandum of understanding by end of August. So the plan is to complete a full route feasibility analysis once all those are identified in terms of energy consumption, ridership levels, and transit scheduling by end of October. And then we will go and find financing and funding options, and we will submit like the full proposal to Government of Canada, such as Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure and Canadian Infrastructure Bank by end of this year. We move on to the next slide, please. So as part of this joint procurement, we are pursuing an innovation P3 model. So we have different players, vehicle manufacturers, operators, roadside infrastructure, and data analysts. So this joint procurement helps us to reduce cost and facilitate the deployment. And as part of this procurement, we actually outsource like different aspects of this procurement to like other companies that are expert in different fields of these autonomous shuttles to achieve long-term viability. Next slide, please. And yeah, and these are the, in terms of upcoming sessions, here are the topics of next sessions. So session 3, the theme of session will be on road testing and approval certification and cybersecurity specification. And we have 2 other following sessions. So stay tuned as we update you on this project moving forward. And next slide, please. And finally, don't miss QTRIC Low Carbon Smart Mobility Conference. You can check QTRIC website and register at QTRIC website for this conference for more information. And feel free to contact me if you have any question about the smart vehicle project and this conference in general. So this is the end of slides today. Just want to check with my colleagues if I've missed anything. If not, we can end the session as we are right on time.
Yeah, that is fantastic, Elnaz. So we do want to thank everybody for your participation. As you know, the goal is really to share a lot of information to move us to a procurement that does advance technology, that does attract people and companies to invest in the Canadian landscape in this space. So thank you very much to all the presenters. We greatly appreciate it. We will be fully exploiting your brains going forward as we do this effort. And we look forward to welcoming you next in about a week and a half to our national conference. Take care and stay safe.